My name is Ruth Mallory. And the day my son became a CEO, I cried so hard I couldn't finish my coffee. Not out of sadness, not out of pride alone, but because I could finally exhale. After nearly 4 decades of sacrifice, single motherhood, and sleepless nights, something inside me whispered, "You did it, Ruth. You raised a good man." When people talk about success, they usually show the headlines, the conferences, the tailored suits and TED Talks. But they never show you the silent parts. The woman in the thrift store sweater packing her son's lunch with stale bread because payday was still 2 days away. Or the mother skipping meals to pay for her child's math tutoring. Or the broken car she drove for 7 years because he needed braces. That was me. I lost my husband to a stroke when my son Ethan was only 5 years old. It shattered everything, not just the man I loved, but the illusion that someone else would help me carry the weight. I remember standing at his funeral, Ethan clinging to my skirt and thinking I will never let him feel this alone. So I worked in the library at his school so I could be close, then at the public library on weekends, then freelanced editing dissertations at night. There were months I didn't have enough to cover rent and electricity, but somehow we made it. Not with magic, with math and rationing and the stubbornness of a woman who refused to fail. Ethan was brilliant. By 14, he was building websites for small businesses. By 18, he had a full scholarship to MIT. By 26, he was featured in Forbes. And at 32, he became the CEO of an AI startup valued at $500 million. He called me that night, that CEO night. His voice was trembling like it did when he was a boy who got picked first in dodgeball. "Mom, we closed the Series B. I'm the CEO." I didn't say anything at first. My mouth was open, but nothing came out. Then I cried. Tears of something ancient and unspoken. The kind of tears only a mother understands, not because she wants something from her child, but because she gave him everything she had. From then on, Ethan insisted on sending me money. "It's just a little something," he said. "$5,000 a month. For groceries. For fun. You deserve it." I hesitated at first. I told him I was fine. My bills were manageable and I liked living simply. But he insisted. And I let him. Every month, like clockwork, that $5,000 would land in my account. I used part of it for my garden club dues, some for repairs around the house, and the rest to cook Sunday stews for my neighbors. I even donated to the local children's reading program under Ethan's name. People said, "You must be proud." I said, "Proud? No, I'm grateful." But sometimes in the quiet, I wondered, was this his way of thanking me? Or of keeping me at a distance? He didn't visit much. The calls became shorter. His wife Alana rarely spoke to me beyond the perfunctory "Hi Ruth" at the holidays. But I chalked it up to busyness, to modern life, to being in the tech world where everyone's always running. Still, I cherished that monthly deposit not for the money, but for what it symbolized. It was proof that he remembered. And then one day I heard something I wasn't meant to hear. It was during a family gathering, Ethan's birthday actually. I'd brought my famous blackberry crumble. People were milling about, champagne flowing, jazz humming in the background. I stepped into the hallway to get a breath of quiet, and that's when I heard Alana. She was on the phone, laughing. "No, he sends her $5,000. Just enough to keep her quiet." My mom. "She gets 50. She raised me after all." 50. $50,000. A month. My legs felt like water. I leaned against the wall and blinked. Once, twice. Maybe I misheard. But no, her words were crystal clear, piercing, and deliberate. "He says my mom's his real family now. She understands him, not like Ruth, always playing humble, so outdated." The world didn't crash in that moment. It cracked, silently, invisibly, but undeniably. I didn't confront her. I didn't scream. I just turned back toward the dining room, picked up my crumble, and quietly placed it on the counter. And I smiled. A smile I hadn't used in years, the one that doesn't reach the eyes. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the words circling like birds of prey. She gets 50. She understands him, not like Ruth. And I asked myself a question I never thought I'd have to ask. Did I raise a stranger? The next morning, the $5,000 landed in my account like always. Punctual, sterile, silent. It used to warm me. Now it chilled me. I stared at the transaction in my banking app as if it were a message written in a foreign language. How many times had I told myself this money was love in disguise? That even if he didn't visit or call or ask about my health, this monthly deposit was proof he remembered, that I mattered. But now I knew what I was really worth. 1/10 of the woman who hadn't changed his diapers, who hadn't sacrificed her dreams to see his come true, who hadn't sat in emergency rooms or wept over rejection letters or stayed up all night to help him finish a science fair project with cardboard and glitter and hope. $5,000. That was the cost of my motherhood. I didn't touch the money that month. Not a cent. I left it there like a monument to disillusionment. I made do with my savings and a few freelance proofreading gigs I still took on for extra pocket money. I told myself I didn't need it. Not really. Instead, I went back to the basics. I baked. I read poetry. I planted herbs by my windowsill. I hosted potluck dinners for the neighborhood ladies who still called me Miss Ruth, even though I hadn't worked in a library in over 10 years. I focused on being human, not transactional. And still I said nothing, because saying something, what would that do? 'Cause a scene? Provoke defensiveness. Invite pity. I didn't want any of that. I wanted truth. One evening, I made my famous lentil stew and invited Ethan and Alana to dinner. They hadn't come to my house in months, maybe a year. Alana reluctantly agreed, her voice clipped over the phone. We'll try to swing by. No promises, Ruth. They arrived 40 minutes late. Ethan barely looked up from his phone. Alana didn't take off her sunglasses even indoors. They complimented the food out of obligation. She picked at her salad. He asked me nothing about my life. Not even a "how have you been, Mom?" But I asked them everything about the company, their new condo in Soma, their Himalayan kitten, the gallery Alana had supposedly invested in. I let them speak, and I listened. When they were ready to leave, Ethan gave me a hug that felt like a corporate handshake. Alana air-kissed the air near my ear. Then they left, and I stood in the doorway watching their luxury car pull away. That night, I opened my drawer and took out a faded envelope. Inside, it was a crayon drawing Ethan had made in 2nd grade, a picture of me in front of our old apartment with the sun shining overhead. He'd written, "I love you, Mom. You are the best mom ever in the whole world." Whole, not whole. I smiled, because at one point I had been everything to him. The sun, the roof, the ground, the glue, the whole world. I knew I couldn't stay quiet forever. So the next day, I called an old friend, Carol, who used to work in finance. Sharp as a whip, never missed a decimal. I asked her if she could help me understand something confidentially. She agreed without question. Over tea, I showed her a printout of the transactions I had downloaded from my bank. The ones labeled automatic deposit from Enmind Inc. Carol raised an eyebrow. "He's paying you from the company's family disbursement fund." I nodded. "And apparently someone else is getting 10 times more." She stared at me for a long moment, then leaned back. "That might be legal, but it's certainly unethical, especially if board members don't know." Board members. The words fluttered in the air like a warning and a weapon. I didn't want revenge, but I wanted clarity. So we dug deeper. Carol helped me trace how the funds were allocated. How Ethan's wife's mother was listed as a strategic domestic consultant on the company's discretionary ledger, a vague label likely designed to hide a personal payout. The number was consistent. 50 yen month. Filed. Hidden. Clean. I sat back in Carol's living room and let the truth settle around me like thick smoke. He hadn't just undervalued me. He'd reclassified me. 5,000 for groceries, 50,000 for consulting, and not a single. "How are you doing, Mom?" I left Carol's house with a folder in my bag and something I hadn't carried in years. Resolve. Later that night, I made myself a cup of chamomile tea and sat by the window. The lights of the city flickered in the distance like the neurons of a massive brain, a world Ethan now commanded. But as powerful as he had forgotten the first algorithm. Input, love, output, love. Input, silence. Output, silence. I looked down at my phone. The screen lit up with a notification. $5,000 deposited. I let it fade. And instead, I picked up my pen. I began drafting something. Not a letter. Not a confrontation. But something that might outlast all of us. A name. A purpose. A legacy. Because I may only be worth $5,000 to my son, but I was about to become priceless to someone else. 2 weeks later, I stood at the back of a glittering rooftop cocktail party, one of those sanitized, sterilized tech affairs filled with champagne flutes, linen blazers, and smile-polished lies. I hadn't been invited, but I knew the building, knew the doorman, knew how to blend in like a ghost in a silk scarf. This was Ethan's world now, a place of IPOs and talking points where humanity was curated in slideshows and affection was expressed through Venmo transfers. And there he was, my son, standing with his arm around Alana. He looked powerful, confident, unreachable. And then I heard her again. Alana, giggling into her phone glass of rosé, tilted just enough to suggest leisure without laziness. Oh, she still thinks the $5,000 means something, she laughed. It's like paying for a subscription to an old library book, dusty and irrelevant, but can't get rid of it. My stomach twisted. Another woman nearby, younger, flashier, asked, "Wait, you mean his real mom only gets 5? Your mom gets, what, 10 times that?" 50, Alana grinned. Because she adds real value to his life. They all laughed. And I stood there, not broken, not even furious. Just awake. That was the moment something inside me turned. Not in vengeance, but in clarity. I saw them all for what they were. Architects of their own illusion. A son who forgot his roots. A wife who rewrote her husband's family tree. And a circle of people who clapped for it like it was a keynote. I turned and left before Ethan could spot me. I didn't need a scene. I needed a plan. That night, I wrote a new note in my old leather-bound journal. I have fed the ungrateful, but I will nourish the forgotten. The next morning, I contacted my attorney. "Greg," I said, "I'd like to start a nonprofit. A scholarship, actually." He paused. "For what kind of students?" "For the kind that don't get 50K gifts for existing." And just like that, the first steps of the Forgotten Mothers Fund were born. I would use my money, the $5K Ethan thought was hush money, and multiply it with donations, community grants, and the goodwill of strangers who still believed mothers mattered. But I didn't stop there. I reached out to local journalists, many of whom remembered me from my library days, when I used to run reading programs for underprivileged kids. I told them about the scholarship, not about Ethan. I didn't name drop. I didn't attack. I just told them the truth. That some mothers give their whole lives only to be reduced to footnotes. That love isn't a line item on a ledger. That gratitude shouldn't need PR. One reporter, a sharp, wide-eyed woman named Kira, asked if she could write a human interest piece. No scandal, she promised. Just legacy. I agreed. The article was published online under the headline, "She raised a tech CEO, but her real fortune is what she gives back." It went viral within days. Thousands of comments poured in. "This reminds me of my mom. I need to call her. I hope her son reads this and feels the weight. She's worth more than anyone in that boardroom." The next week, my phone rang. It was Ethan. I didn't pick up. I needed him to sit in the silence for once, to feel what it was like to be ignored, not out of spite, but necessity. Later that night, a car pulled up outside my house. It was him. No driver. No entourage. Just my son in his expensive coat, looking suddenly very small. He stood at my door, hesitated, then knocked. I opened it. He didn't speak. Just held something out. An envelope. Inside was a photo of us. Me and little Ethan asleep on a worn-out couch. His head on my lap, a crayon drawing fallen from his hand. And a note. I forgot the wrong things. I remembered the wrong people. We stood in silence for a long time. And for the first time in years, I saw my son. Not the CEO, not the husband, but the boy I once held during thunder. Still, I said nothing. I wasn't ready to forgive, but I was ready to be heard. Because now the world was listening. Ethan began calling more after that night. Not every day. Not in dramatic waves. But often enough that I could sense the guilt crawling its way back into his bones, the kind of guilt that doesn't shout, but lingers in the pause between words. I didn't make it easy for him. Not out of cruelty. Out of self-respect. I answered when I wanted to. I asked real questions. I didn't laugh at hollow jokes or accept vague apologies packaged in platitudes like, I've always appreciated you. I wanted substance, accountability. And if I couldn't have that, I'd settle for silence. One Sunday afternoon, I invited him over for tea. He arrived on time, rare for him. No flashy car, no designer coat. Just jeans a button down and the look of a man who'd read too many headlines about himself and suddenly recognized none of them. I poured chamomile. We sat across from each other at the table, sunlight pooling between our cups. I read the article he said after a while. I know. It made me look like a fool. You didn't need help. He flinched. Good. Why didn't you tell me? He asked, his voice barely audible. Why didn't you say you felt forgotten? I stirred my tea. Because it wasn't about feeling Ethan. It was about fact. You forgot. I just lived with the truth. He looked away. I didn't mean to. I thought 5,000 was generous. I didn't realize. That's the problem, I interrupted gently. You didn't realize. We let the silence stretch between us. Not uncomfortable, not hostile, just sobering. Then I said, tell me something. Why 50,000 for Alana's mother? He hesitated. Alana said she needed help, that she was going through a rough patch. No, I said. Tell me why you thought she deserved 10 times more than the woman who raised you. His throat worked to form an answer, but none came. Finally, I leaned in. Do you know what 50,000 buys? I asked. He shook his head. It buys you flattery, social currency, shiny optics. But it doesn't buy you forgiveness. And it sure as hell doesn't buy back time. I reached into my drawer and pulled out a small wooden box. Inside was the very first check Ethan ever sent me, framed faded, still crisp around the corners. He looked at it like a relic. This meant something once, I said, because it came from a place of love, not guilt, not obligation, not optics. I slid the box back and smiled softly. I don't want your money, Ethan. I want your memory. I want your honesty. I want to know that when I'm gone, the story of me isn't just a footnote between balance sheets. He blinked rapidly, fighting something behind his eyes. I'm sorry, Mom, he said. I really am. I believe you, I whispered. But believing doesn't erase anything. He stayed a while longer. We talked about nothing, the weather, the garden, a neighbor's new cat. It felt like rewinding a tape. You're not sure you want to hear again, but needing to anyway. After he left, I sat in the quiet and stared at the empty seat across from me. It didn't hurt the way it used to, because somewhere inside I had drawn a line. Not one meant to sever, but one meant to protect. Later that week, I went to a small community center and finalized the first recipients of the Forgotten Mothers Fund. 3 single mothers, one a refugee, one a janitor, one a former addict in recovery, each receiving full support for continuing education and living costs. When we handed them their envelopes, one of them asked through tears, "Why me?" And I said, "Because you are remembered. Because the world may not know what you do, but someone has to." That night, as I walked home, my phone buzzed. A news alert. CEO of NMind reallocates executive funds toward motherhood scholarship after viral story. I laughed. Not bitterly, not smugly, just amused at how the world catches up slowly to what mothers already know. That legacy isn't measured in equity. It's measured in memory. The morning I met Kira again, the journalist who had written the original piece, she was waiting for me at the corner cafe, notebook in hand, eyes bright, with something between admiration and regret. "Your story," she said, sliding me a copy of The Atlantic Has Teeth Now. I looked at the magazine. There on the cover, "The Quiet Revolution of Forgotten Mothers," and beneath it in smaller print, "How One Woman's Silence Dismantled the Illusion of Tech-Fueled Gratitude." I traced the embossed letters with my fingers, not because I was proud, but because I was stunned by how little it took for the world to notice, and how long I had lived unnoticed. Kira leaned forward. "There's pressure now. Pressure on him. On Enmind. On Alana." I sipped my tea. "Good. They're digging," she said. And guess what? The $50K a month wasn't the only line item. I raised an eyebrow. She showed me the spreadsheets she'd gotten from an anonymous leak. Extravagant purchases disguised as consulting expenses, vacations marked as wellness retreats, and even an art collection gifted to Alana's mother through a shell foundation. It's all legal, she said, but the ethics are bankrupt, I finished. That word hung in the air between us, not financial, but moral. I went home that afternoon and pulled out every receipt, every bank record, every email Ethan had sent since becoming CEO, not to weaponize them, but to understand the full story. Because if I was going to move forward, I needed to know exactly what I was walking away from. What I saw confirmed what I feared. The $5,000 wasn't just an oversight. It was a strategy, a cost-effective way to check the supportive son box without inviting deeper relationship expectation or accountability. He had put me on auto-pay, like a utility bill. It wasn't the money that wounded me. It was the impersonality of it. Worse, the illusion that it meant something. And still I said nothing to him. I didn't need to, because something was already unraveling on its own. 3 days later, I received an email from one of Nmine's board members, a woman named Celeste, who had met me once at a holiday gala 5 years ago. She was polite but pointed. "Mrs. Mallory, I'd like to speak with you off the record if you're willing. We've read the article. We have questions." I agreed. We met at a private office near the Embarcadero. She offered coffee. I declined. She got to the point. "We have a problem," she said. "Your son is brilliant, but brilliance without grounding turns into drift, and drift turns into detachment." I said nothing. She continued. "The article was a wake-up call, not because it embarrassed us, but because it exposed something we've all chosen to ignore, which is that the company was built on idealism but is now run on ego." I could have said, "I told you so." Instead, I asked, "What do you want from me?" She paused. Perspective. Reminders. Maybe. A little truth. I gave her what I could, without bitterness, without revenge, just observations. I told her about Ethan's childhood, his obsession with logic, his fear of emotional mess, his allergy to vulnerability. I told her that when he was 7, he once wrote me a letter that said, "When I grow up, I'll fix everything that hurts you." And maybe I said he thought money was that fix. Celeste nodded. "Would you be willing to speak with the board formally?" "No," I said, "but I'll write them something." That evening, I sat down and wrote a letter. Not to take down Ethan, not to save him either, but to remind them and him that leadership without humanity is simply machinery. That power doesn't corrupt, it reveals. I mailed it the next morning. And then I did something else. I withdrew $20,000 from my savings, not Ethan's, and made 3 large grocery deliveries to women I had met through the scholarship applications. Single moms. One recently widowed, one with 2 kids in therapy, one working 3 jobs. Each box had a note. "You are not a footnote. You are the story." Later that week, I received a text from Ethan. "The board is reviewing everything. I don't know what will happen." I replied, "That's the difference between surviving and living, son. One is about control. The other is about truth." He didn't text back. And for the first time, I didn't wait, because I had already built something bigger than his empire. I had built a name, one not tied to his, but to mine. I was pouring coffee the morning the press release went live. No phone call. No warning. Just a forwarded email from one of the scholarship volunteers with the subject line, "You need to see this." The headline read, "CEO of Nmind steps down temporarily amid internal ethics review." Below it, a photo of Ethan at a podium, eyes dark-rimmed and tired, the charisma replaced by something unfamiliar. Humility. I stood in my kitchen, sunlight creeping across the floor, the smell of toast in the air, and I felt nothing. Not triumph, not sadness, not even vindication, just stillness. And maybe that's what real power feels like. Not noise, not revenge, but the silence of truth finally laid bare. A few minutes later, my landline rang. I let it go to voicemail. Then my cell phone buzzed. It was him. I picked up. His voice was raspy, worn. "They asked me to step back while they restructure some policies. PR says it's a temporary gesture. I think it's more than that." "It should be," I said. He didn't argue. He didn't defend. "I read your letter to the board," he continued. They sent it around as mandatory reading for executive training. I let out a small, breathy laugh. So now I'm corporate curriculum. He paused. Mom, you are always the curriculum. I just stopped studying. That one hurt, because it was too true too late. I'm not asking for forgiveness, he added. I don't think I deserve it. I'm not offering it, I replied. Not yet. Forgiveness isn't something you ask for once. It's something you live into. I understand, he said quietly. And what about her? I asked. He knew who I meant. She's angry. Says I betrayed her. I raised an eyebrow. Funny. That's what I thought too. He sighed. We're working through things. But I'm staying with a friend for now. Trying to figure out who I am when I'm not being told who I should be. There was a pause. Then, are you still getting the deposits? I canceled the transfer last week. You didn't have to. Yes, I said. I did. I want to support you, he insisted. I softened not because I was ready to let go, but because I saw the small boy inside him again. The one who used to bring me dandelions and say they were tuxedo flowers. You want to support me? I asked. Yes. Then stop measuring me in dollars. Start measuring me in memory. He didn't speak for a long time. Then finally, can I come over tonight? I looked at the calendar not to check my schedule, but to remind myself this was real. That this was happening on an ordinary day with no script, no crisis, just two people finally telling the truth. Yes, I said. But don't come as a CEO. Come as Ethan. He choked out a breath. I will. That evening, I cooked his favorite mushroom risotto with rosemary and garlic bread. I even set the table with the blue linen he used to call fancy napkins. He arrived with a box under his arm. When I asked what it was, he placed it on the table and opened it carefully. Inside, dozens of photos, old letters, drawings, a broken watch I gave him when he turned 16, his high school valedictorian speech scribbled in pencil. I found them all in storage, he said, and I realized I'd been trying to archive my past instead of honoring it. I blinked slowly. Then start here, I said. And don't stop. We ate quietly. And that night, for the first time in years, my house felt full again. Not because my son had returned, but because I had finally been seen, not as a mother on a payroll, but as a woman who mattered without condition. The days that followed unfolded like the quiet pages of a book you didn't know you needed to reread. Ethan came by more often, not out of obligation, not with forced smiles or awkward silences, but with the gentle presence of someone learning how to sit in his own skin again. He helped prune my herb garden. We cleaned out the attic. He even fixed the back fence with the same stubborn precision he had as a teenager, assembling science fair displays out of duct tape and ambition. One afternoon, as we sipped tea on the porch, he asked, "Do you think I became someone you're ashamed of?" I didn't answer immediately, because the truth was complicated. No, I said at last, but I think you became someone I didn't recognize, and I grieve that more than I can ever explain. He looked down. I thought I was protecting you, he said. That giving money was the respectful thing to do. It was the convenient thing to do, I corrected gently. Respect doesn't come in wire transfers. It comes in remembering someone's favorite poem, in showing up, in listening without rushing. He nodded slowly. You always spoke in metaphors. You used to understand them. That made him laugh. And somehow that moment, a shared breath between two generations separated not just by years, but by expectations, felt more healing than any apology could ever be. Later that week, I was invited to speak at a community event called Daughters of Grace, a local initiative that honored women over 60 who had made quiet contributions to society. Teachers, nurses, caretakers, single mothers, forgotten pillars of neighborhoods. When I arrived, the room was packed. What I didn't know, what no one told me, was that Ethan had nominated me. They read his letter aloud before I took the stage. I stood behind the curtain listening to the words I thought I'd never hear. She raised me with books, silence, and strength. She taught me to love the quiet things. I tried to replace her sacrifices with success, but I see now success without memory is just vanity. The audience applauded. I stepped onto the stage. I looked at them. Strangers, neighbors, some women with tears in their eyes. And then I looked at Ethan sitting in the second row, not trying to hide his emotion. "My name is Ruth Mallory," I began. "And I was paid $5,000 a month to forget who I was." The room went still, but instead of forgetting, I remembered. I remembered the nights I stayed up teaching my son how to spell compassion. I remembered the recipes handed down by my mother. I remembered the cost of motherhood and how we're told again and again to accept crumbs and call them gratitude. I paused. And then one day I stopped accepting. A murmur rippled through the room. I started a scholarship not because I needed recognition, but because I knew someone else did. Someone else is always watching, always learning what love looks like. I stepped back. The applause rose like a wave. And as I walked off stage, Ethan met me at the steps. He didn't say anything. He just held my hand. That night, I sat by my window journal open on my lap. I wrote only one sentence. "This is not a story of a forgotten mother. This is a story of a remembered self." And I meant it. Because the truth is, I never needed my son to make me valuable. I only needed him to see that I always was. And now finally, I think he does. Weeks passed and a quiet rhythm returned to my life, but it was different now. Not because I had forgiven everything, I hadn't, but because I had stopped shrinking myself to make others feel comfortable. I had stopped swallowing discomfort just to maintain peace. I had finally learned that dignity isn't something you're given. It's something you reclaim. One Thursday morning, I received a handwritten letter in the mail. The envelope was thick, the ink slightly smudged. No return address. I unfolded the paper and began reading. "Dear Mrs. Mallory, I am Alana's mother. I read about you in the Atlantic, and I'm writing because I owe you an apology. Not for what my daughter said, though, I was horrified, but for my part in the lie. You see, I did receive $50,000 a month. I never asked for it. I was told it was a family gift, that Ethan wanted to express appreciation. I didn't question it, and that makes me complicit. I'm not proud of what I let happen or what I allowed Alana to believe about you. But I want you to know something. I never thought I deserved more. I knew the truth, even if no one said it aloud. You were the one who raised him. And you did it beautifully. Ellen Pearson." I sat in my chair for a long time, the letter resting in my lap like a weight I hadn't known I was still carrying. Not because it changed the past, it didn't, but because it was a crack in the wall. A quiet moment of acknowledgement that didn't come dressed in performance or PR. Just honesty. That night, I made soup for the first time in a while, the kind I used to make when Ethan was sick as a boy. Chicken and barley slow simmered with thyme and celery. I wrapped up half of it in a glass container and left it on Ellen's doorstep. I didn't leave a note. Sometimes silence speaks more clearly than words. The next morning, Ethan called. His voice was steadier now, more present. "Alana and I are separating," he said. I figured, I replied. "She's not the villain. Neither am I. We just built something fake and kept polishing it until it cracked." I didn't say "I told you so." I just listened. "I've been volunteering at the Scholarship Center," he added after a moment. "Nothing fancy. Just helping with applications. Listening to stories." I smiled. "That's the hardest work of all, listening. I want to do more," he said. "Not with the company. With people. With real things." "Then do it," I said. "But don't do it for redemption." "What should I do it for?" "For return. Of your soul. Of your name. Of your purpose." He was quiet for a long time. Then, "Do you think we'll ever be—" "Okay." "We already are," I said. "Just not the version you imagined." That Sunday he came over again, this time with his sleeves rolled ready to cook. We made lentil curry together. His hands clumsy with the spices, mine steady from years of repetition. We didn't talk much. We didn't need to. Halfway through stirring, he turned to me and asked, "Why did you never ask for more?" I paused. "Because I thought love didn't need asking." He nodded. "But I was wrong," I added. "Sometimes you do have to ask. Not for love, but for acknowledgement, for weight, for truth." He didn't reply. He just placed a hand on mine. Not performative, not apologetic. Just there, present. That evening, as the sun melted into the horizon, we sat on the porch and watched a group of kids ride by on bicycles, laughing like the world owed them nothing and everything all at once. And for the first time in a long time, I realized something powerful. I had spent years waiting for someone to restore my value, but all along I'd never lost it. It was there in the books I shelved, in the lunches I packed, in the quiet nights I cried alone and still showed up the next morning with open arms. My name had always meant something. It just took a storm to polish the stone. It started with a tweet. A woman from Ohio reposted the article about me with the caption, "I'd give up every spa day my son ever paid for if he'd just visit once without checking his watch." It went viral overnight. Suddenly, I wasn't just the mother of a CEO. I became a symbol, unwilling perhaps, but honest, of something far more universal. The woman who was always there until no one noticed she was fading. Within a week, Forgotten Mothers was trending on platforms I didn't even use. Facebook groups formed. Articles popped up with titles like, "Mothers Are Not Maintenance Expenses," "The Currency of Care," "Why Time Beats Money Every Time," "How We Gave Our Mothers the Leftovers and Called It Love." People sent letters, hundreds of them. Some from daughters who'd never said thank you. Some from sons who had followed the exact same path Ethan did, ambition first, family somewhere far behind. One read, "I used to send my mom $1,000 a month and call that love. Then I watched your video. Now I drive 4 hours to cook with her every Sunday." It humbled me and overwhelmed me, but mostly it reminded me that my story was no longer mine alone. At the Scholarship Center, we began receiving donations from strangers. Some gave $10, some gave $10,000. Notes were attached. For the mom I forgot to honor, for Ruth who reminded me to remember, for the legacy I want to build before it's too late. We expanded. What was once the Forgotten Mothers Fund became the Ruth Project. Not just scholarships, but workshops, grief circles, legal aid for elder women pushed out of their own homes, therapy for mothers whose silence had become their prison. I didn't speak at every event, but I watched, I listened. And every time a woman shared her story, abandonment, neglect, erasure, I felt like I was seeing a mirror of myself in 1,000 forms. One day, a young woman approached me after a workshop. She couldn't have been more than 30. "Mrs. Mallory?" she said, eyes shining. "My mom's gone, but you made me talk to her," in my head, "and say sorry." I held her hand for a long time. "You're not late," I said. "She hears you." Back home, my world was quieter. No journalists, no headlines, just the hum of the kettle and the slow comfort of routine. Ethan still visited. He was different now, more present, more reflective. He had stepped down from Mind permanently. "I want to build something that doesn't sell," he said one evening, "something that heals." "Then build it with silence," I said, "and people will hear it louder than any pitch." He laughed, but I saw the truth sinking in. We started walking together once a week. No phones, no business talk. Just mother and son rebuilding brick by brick, a bridge neither of us thought could hold weight again. And Alana, she left. New legal battle. Just a cold email, a forwarded settlement, and silence. Ethan didn't say much. I didn't ask for more. Some goodbyes are necessary evacuations of what was never home. One evening after dinner, he handed me a thin box wrapped in linen cloth. "Open it," he said. Inside was a necklace. Simple. Silver. A tiny pendant engraved with a single word. "Remembered." I touched it lightly. "You didn't have to." "I know," he said. "But I wanted to do something. Not with money, but meaning." He helped me clasp it around my neck. And when I looked at my reflection in the mirror, I didn't see a woman who had been shortchanged. I saw someone who had reclaimed her name. That night, I wrote in my journal, "You can give someone everything and still be invisible. But once you give yourself back to yourself, you're no longer waiting to be seen. You are light in your own name." It was just after the first spring rain, when the city council invited me to speak at their annual Voices That Shape Us event. I almost declined, not because I was afraid, but because I didn't want to become a monument. I wasn't looking to be remembered in plaques or keynote quotes. But then I thought of the other women, the ones still folding laundry in silence, still receiving birthday flowers signed with a business assistant's name, still pretending that the $500 a month in their account was love in disguise. And so I said yes. The hall was modest but full. Teachers, social workers, Nurses, mothers with tears behind their smiles, sons in tailored suits who sat a little straighter when I took the stage. Ethan was there too, second row, no VP badge, just a quiet, steady presence. I didn't use notes. I didn't read from a script. I simply told the truth. I used to think love was loud, I began. That it came wrapped in bouquets or big checks or vacation homes. But real love is quiet. It's staying, remembering, showing up when no one's clapping. I glanced at Ethan. There was a time when my son gave his mother-in-law 10 times more than he gave me, and I accepted that. Not because I believed it was fair, but because I thought that was the price of love in his world. Murmurs moved through the room like ripples on still water. But love isn't currency, I continued, and mothers are not line items. A beat of silence. I didn't start a scholarship fund to prove a point. I started it because I knew I wasn't alone. Because the world is filled with women who gave everything and now sit in quiet kitchens wondering if anyone remembers the weight they carried. I looked out into the crowd. So many faces, so many truths. And this, I said, holding my hands out, this is how we remember. Together, loudly or softly, but together. The applause was long, but it wasn't thunderous, it was sustained. As if no one wanted to stop the sound of acknowledgement once it had finally begun. Afterward, Ethan approached me with a folded sheet of paper. I wrote something, he said, not for the press, just for me. I opened it later that night. Dear Mom, you taught me everything that mattered and I traded it for everything that didn't. You were the first voice I heard. I forgot that, but I will never forget again. I folded the letter and placed it next to the first drawing he ever gave me, the crayon one where I was smiling in front of our old apartment. The one where he called me the best mom in the whole world. Whole, not whole, but now maybe, just maybe, we were getting there. That week, I received a letter from a woman in Sweden, then another from Cape Town, then one from a soldier stationed overseas, all with the same story in different words. Thank you for reminding me that I'm worth remembering. It became a daily ritual reading their letters over morning tea. Some handwritten, others emailed, each one a mosaic piece of a global ache I hadn't known existed. One morning, Ethan joined me. He read them too. He didn't speak. He just looked at me and said, "You built a movement." No, I said, I built a mirror. And people are finally seeing what they lost. That afternoon, a small envelope arrived. Inside was a donation receipt from Alana. No note. Just the amount. $250,000 designated to the Ruth Project. I said nothing. But inside I felt a quiet shift. Because redemption doesn't always roar. Sometimes it knocks once and walks away, leaving behind only a check and a lesson. That evening, Ethan and I walked through the neighborhood. A child rode by on a bike with a "Thanks Mom" sticker on the frame. I smiled. And he said, "Do you think you'll ever write a book?" I laughed. "I've written my whole life. You just never read it." "Well," he said, nudging my arm, "I'm reading now." And under that first streetlight in that small moment, I realized I had stopped waiting to be loved in the way I once begged for. Now I was being loved in the way I finally deserved. Months passed. Spring turned to summer. The lilacs bloomed early, and the neighborhood children started leaving sidewalk chalk messages on my front steps. Most were drawings, hearts, flowers, a lopsided cat, but occasionally someone would scrawl a note. "My mom says you're the reason we say thank you now. I read about you in class. You're famous. You make me want to hug my grandma more." They made me smile, not because I craved recognition, but because I had become something I never planned to be. A reminder. A reminder that sacrifice isn't invisible. A reminder that motherhood isn't a footnote. A reminder that value doesn't vanish just because we don't say it out loud. Meanwhile, the Ruth Project kept growing. What began as 3 scholarships had expanded into a network of chapters across 8 cities. Volunteers, mostly adult children who'd once forgotten their own mothers, ran donation drives, memory workshops, and call your mom campaigns. Ethan helped too quietly, intentionally. He never put his name on anything, but I knew his fingerprints were there. One day, as we walked through the new community garden built in my neighborhood with project funds, he stopped by a bench with a small plaque. He pointed to it. I leaned closer. For the mothers who were never asked how they were doing. For the women who gave everything and were told they asked for too much. We remember you. The Ruth Project. My throat tightened. I ran my fingers over the engraving. It wasn't about me. It was about us. All of us. That evening, Ethan cooked dinner at my house. Not takeout, not reservations, actual cooking. The curry was too salty and the rice a little overdone, but I ate every bite. "You're just humoring me," he said, grinning. "I humored you when you were 7 and made me mud pies with worms. This is gourmet in comparison." He laughed, and for a moment I saw a flicker of the boy who used to climb into my bed during thunderstorms, whispering, "I know you'll keep me safe." When dinner was done, we washed dishes together in comfortable silence. Then out of nowhere, he said, "I'm going to therapy now." I dried my hands. Good. I never realized how much I needed it, he admitted, or how much I didn't know how to express things that weren't metrics or performance. "That's because no one taught you," I said. "And you stopped letting me try." He nodded. "I want to relearn." We didn't say anything else. But that moment, it was bigger than any apology. Later that week, I received a letter from the city mayor's office. They wanted to name a reading room in the public library after me. I declined. Instead, I wrote back, "Please name it after my mother." Her name was Eloise. She taught me to read, to stand still in storms, and to speak without shouting. She never got a plaque. She just raised one. And so the Eloise Mallory Reading Room was born. It smelled of old pages and new beginnings. And when I visited it for the first time, I sat in the corner where the light hit just right and imagined my mother sitting beside me whispering, "See, they remember?" Eventually, one night as I read through scholarship essays, I came across a letter that stopped me cold. It wasn't an application. It wasn't even from a student. It was from a woman in hospice care. She wrote, "My son sent me money every month but never came to visit. Then he saw a video about a woman named Ruth. He came home, held my hand, told me he remembered. I want to thank you for that. When I go, I'll go feeling seen." And not everyone gets that. I folded the letter and held it to my chest. Because sometimes we forget that healing travels. It echoes. It ripples. It lands where it's most needed, even if we never know where. And in that quiet moment, I understood the truth I had never been brave enough to admit before. I hadn't just gotten my son back. I had helped the world remember its mothers. That fall, I received an invitation to speak at a summit in New York. Not just any summit, the Global Ethics in Tech Conference. They wanted me, a retired librarian, to speak alongside industry leaders, policy analysts, and innovation experts. The irony wasn't lost on me. Ethan, when he heard, offered to fly with me. "We can go together," he said. "I'll sit in the front row and take notes this time." I smiled. "Only if you promise not to check your email during my speech." He raised a hand like a scout's oath. No devices, just dignity. We flew out on a crisp October morning, the leaves below burning red and gold like they were holding the last embers of summer. As the plane soared over the clouds, I looked at my son. He was reading not emails, not earnings, reports, but a book, an actual paper book. I didn't ask what it was. I just let myself enjoy the sound of pages turning. When we landed, the organizers greeted me with flowers and polite smiles. One woman said, "Your story reshaped the way our entire panel approached this year's agenda." I nodded, gracious but grounded, because I hadn't come to be adored. I'd come to remind them of something they'd forgotten. The summit itself was a sea of polished egos, brilliant minds, and nervous energy. But when it was my turn to speak, the room grew still. I stood behind the podium, not as a CEO, not as an executive, not even as the mother of, but as Ruth Mallory. "I'm not here to disrupt the tech industry," I began. "I'm here to disturb your memory." A few heads turned. Good. I raised a boy who became a CEO, and then he forgot. Not just me, but everything that made him who he was. I let the silence sit before continuing. He remembered algorithms, but not sacrifice. Metrics, but not meals. Public praise, but not private prayers whispered beside his bed as a child. I told them about the $5,000, the $50,000, the silence, the unraveling, the remembering. I didn't use dramatic flourishes. I didn't raise my voice. I simply told the truth. Technology is not the enemy, I said. amnesia is. And when we build systems that reward distance over connection, we are building futures where no one remembers who brought us here. I paused. And I believe it's time we put memory back on the ledger. The applause was thoughtful, not frenzied, not performative, but real. Afterward, a woman in her 60s approached me with tears in her eyes. "I've worked in Silicon Valley for 30 years, she said, and I've never felt like I belonged until today." Another man said, "My mother's in assisted living. I haven't seen her in 2 years. I booked a flight just now." And just like that, I knew the words had landed, not just in minds, but in hearts. That evening, Ethan and I had dinner at a quiet bistro tucked between buildings that had seen more decades than either of us. Over mushroom ravioli and apple tart, he leaned in and said, "I think you're the most important voice in tech right now." I laughed. "Then tech is in real trouble." "No," he said, serious now. "It's finally waking up." He pulled out a folder from his satchel. "These are notes," he said, "for a project I'm starting. Remind me." It's a platform to connect adult children with their aging parents, not just with reminders, but real moments. Conversation starters, memory journals, scheduled calls, legacy stories. I blinked. "You want to build an app to make people remember?" "I want to build an app that makes forgetting harder," he said. "That helps people notice before it's too late." I stared at him for a moment. "Do you want my input?" "I want your name on it." I reached across the table and touched his hand. "You already gave it a name," I said. "Your own?" We flew home the next morning. When I got back, there was a package waiting on my doorstep. No label, no note, just a small velvet box. Inside was a necklace. A second one. This time the pendant didn't say remembered. It said reminded. Because now I wasn't just the echo of someone who had been forgotten. I was the voice that reminded others what they were at risk of losing before silence made the choice for them. The world didn't change overnight, but something shifted. I could feel it in the small things. At the market, a man in his 40s stopped me near the apples and said, "I called my mother last night." I haven't done that in years. I told her I'm sorry. At the library, a young woman placed a note inside a donated book that read, "To whoever finds this, please don't wait to say thank you." And at the Ruth Project headquarters, we installed a wall, not a wall of fame, a wall of names, handwritten cards from all over the world, each one with a mother's name and one sentence. She stayed. She taught me to tie my shoes and my soul. She never asked for recognition, just presence. She forgave what she shouldn't have had to. She is the reason I am still here. There were thousands. Some were written by children, some by mothers writing for themselves, some posthumous sent by those who learned too late, and one in Ethan's handwriting. She gave me a future and never asked for credit. But today she gets it. The media started calling again. Book deals, documentary pitches, speaking tours. I declined most of them. Because the point wasn't to make this about me. It was never about me. It was about all the mothers like me. The ones who raised presidents, janitors, artists, CEOs. The ones whose names never made it onto building plaques or corporate thank you slides, but who taught empathy by example and strength by necessity. One day I visited the grave of my own mother. It was a small plot beneath an oak tree in the quietest corner of the cemetery. I brought her marigolds, her favorite. As I knelt to lay them, I whispered, "They remember now, Mama." A breeze lifted the petals. I stayed a while. When I returned home, I found Ethan waiting on the porch. He had a folder in his hand again, and a strange smile on his face. "What's this one?" I asked. "A letter," he said, "to the board of directors at Mind, declining their offer to reinstate me as CEO." I paused. "You sure?" He nodded. I finally realized building something meaningful means letting go of what was only impressive. Then he handed me another sheet. This one was a draft of his new business charter for Remind Me, mission statement, to make gratitude unavoidable, to bring presence back to families, to help people remember before they regret. He had signed it at the bottom. In memory of Ruth Mallory living legacy. I didn't cry. I just placed a hand over his heart and said, "Now let's make sure it lives in you too." The next day, he hosted the first Remind Me Circle, a simple gathering of adult children and their parents in a local community center. No therapy, no agenda, just conversation. He asked me to speak at the end. I looked around the room at dozens of people holding hands, wiping tears, laughing through the ache of reconnection. And I said, "We all think we have time to say what matters, to be who they need, but we don't. And if you're lucky enough to still have someone to remember, then love them now." Out loud, on purpose, without condition. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of the unspoken truths we all carry until someone gives us permission to release them. That night, as Ethan and I walked back to the car, he asked, "Do you ever wish things had gone differently?" I thought about the years of silence, the checks, the whispers I overheard behind closed doors, the ache of wondering if I was just an obligation. And then I thought about this moment. "No," I said, "because this version of you, I wouldn't trade for anything." He wrapped his arm around mine, and for the first time in our shared history, neither of us needed to say a word. We just walked, remembered, reminded, and finally, home. The following months unfolded like pages in a chapter I never thought I'd live to read. Not the dramatic kind. Not the kind where pain is neatly wrapped with justice and applause, but the kind that lingers steady, slow, filled with healing that doesn't need to announce itself. Ethan moved into a small apartment just 10 minutes from my home. Nothing extravagant. He said I wanted less noise, more space for real things. And I believed him. He no longer lived in a high-rise where he couldn't hear his own thoughts. Now he walked to the farmer's market, took meetings in parks, hosted Sunday dinners. At Mine, he started cooking. Really cooking, asking for my recipes with a notebook in hand, like a student who finally wanted to get it right. One Sunday, he made my grandmother's cornbread. It came out dry. We laughed for 10 minutes. He didn't flinch at imperfection anymore. Neither did I. The Ruth Project expanded to its 15th city. One of our newest programs was called Letters to the Unspoken, a community archive where people could write letters to their mothers living or gone expressing things they never found the words for. Every week I read a few of them aloud in a quiet circle of folding chairs, tissues passed hand to hand. One night, a man in his 70s stood up and read, "I gave my mother my ambition and left her with my absence. I thought success would be enough to redeem the silence. But all she wanted was my voice." He folded the letter, his hands shaking. We said nothing, because sometimes silence is the only way to honor regret without drowning in it. Outside of the project, I lived simply. I still walked to the same grocery store, wore the same coat I'd worn for years, sat in the same armchair near the window where Ethan used to press his nose as a boy to watch for snow. Only now he sat with me. One afternoon, we watched the rain streak down the glass like slow-moving memories. "I keep thinking about that first article," he said. "The one that started it all. The one where you said you were paid to forget." I turned toward him. "And now," I think he said slowly, "you taught the world to remember. And maybe you taught me how to remember too." I smiled. "You're still learning, but I'll take that." We both laughed. Then quietly he pulled a small notebook from his coat. I recognized the cover. It was the same kind I used to pack in his elementary school backpack, with stickers and scribbled multiplication tables. He handed it to me. Inside were entries, dozens, pages filled with moments, small things he remembered. Times I held him during fevers, the smell of Sunday roast, the way I used to hum when I folded laundry, the words I whispered after his father died. "You still have a home? It's me." I closed the book gently. "Why did you write these down?" "Because forgetting is too easy," he said. "And I'm done doing what's easy." That night, we made tea and sat in the quiet. No screens, no headlines. No more measuring our worth in digits and dividends. Just two people finally learning to speak in full sentences again. A week later, I visited a local elementary school library, one of the new reading spaces sponsored by the project. A teacher recognized me. She walked over holding a stack of hand-drawn thank you cards from the students. One in particular stood out. Crayons, block letters, uneven spelling. "Thank you, Mrs. Ruth. My mom says you made her brave." I placed it in my bag. When I returned home, I tacked it above my writing desk right next to the crayon drawing Ethan had made at age 7, the one that once called me the best mom in the whole world. Whole, not whole. But now I was both. I had been broken. I had been overlooked. I had been used, forgotten, mislabeled, and quietly replaced. But through it all, I never stopped loving. And when love is real, when it's patient and fierce and doesn't come with a price tag, it always finds its way back, even if it has to walk the long way. It was a quiet Sunday morning when I realized something that both startled and soothed me. I wasn't angry anymore. The ache that used to throb behind every kind gesture, the doubt that whispered behind every "I love you," the cold arithmetic of $5,000 versus $50,000, they had dissolved into something warmer, deeper, and strangely freeing. I had reclaimed my narrative, and I had done it without raising my voice. That morning, I pulled out a box from the back of my closet, one I hadn't touched in years. Inside were pieces of my life I'd stored away because I didn't think anyone would care. My high school valedictorian speech, the first library card I ever owned, a photo of Ethan in a Halloween costume I sewed by hand, the letter from my late husband written just weeks before his death, telling me he had no doubt I'd raise Ethan into someone kind. I held that letter like a relic and whispered aloud, "I did it, Walter." Just took him a while to come home. Later that day, I visited the Ruth Project's new office space in the city. It was modest recycled wood desks, soft yellow walls, a kettle that always stayed warm. But to me it was sacred. There was a knock at the door. It was Ethan. He held up 2 coffees. "Peace offering." "You already offered peace?" I said, smiling. "This is bribery." We sat by the window and looked out at the street below, where a mural was being painted on the side of the building. Bright, bold strokes of women's faces of all ages, backgrounds, histories. He pointed to one of the faces. "That's you," he said softly. I didn't respond right away. Instead, I looked at the other faces, the unnamed mothers, the silent teachers, the weavers of invisible safety nets. I realized I didn't need to stand out anymore. I just needed to belong among them. "What's next for you?" he asked. "Living," I said. "With no more waiting." He nodded. "And for us?" "We keep walking," I said. "Just like we are. No shortcuts. No forgetting." That evening, after Ethan left, I took a slow walk through the neighborhood. A boy on a bicycle sped past me shouting, "Hi, Miss Ruth!" A father held the hand of his daughter and whispered, "Tell Grandma thank you." A muralist dipped her brush and added one final stroke to the wall of mothers, a warm gold halo around a silver-haired figure. And me, I walked in the cool air beneath leaves turning amber and ash, and thought about how easy it is to measure a life in dollars and years. But I no longer do. I measure mine in names spoken with respect, meals shared with presence, silences held with love, and the echo of a son who finally remembered, not because I demanded it, but because I gave him the chance to discover it for himself. As I stepped through my front door that night, I reached for my journal and wrote the final line of this chapter. I was not waiting for justice. I was waiting for remembrance. And now I remember me. They say memory fades with time. But I've learned that sometimes memory doesn't fade. It just gets buried beneath noise, ego, ambition, and the busyness of pretending not to need one another. And when someone finally digs deep enough, they don't just remember you. They re-meet you. My name is Ruth Mallory. I was once the quiet mother behind a loud success story. Now I am the voice behind a movement that tells every forgotten mother, every silenced grandmother, every woman erased by the world she gave everything to. You were never invisible. If you are watching this and you've ever felt like your love was labeled a transaction, if you've ever watched your children rise while you remained behind holding the weight of who they used to be, if you've ever wondered whether your quiet sacrifices counted, let me say this as clearly as I can. They did. And now the world is remembering. Not because I shouted, but because I stayed, because I wrote, because I never let the forgetting take away what I knew to be true, that I mattered, even when they didn't say it, especially when they didn't say it. And so now I ask you, share this story if it stirred something in you. Comment below with a name you remember, a mother, a grandmother, a woman who stayed. And subscribe to Grace's Truth if you believe stories like this shouldn't disappear. Because for every voice that gets buried, there's another waiting to rise. You can be that voice. Let's remind the world together. Love is not a line item, and mothers are never optional. Thank you.